Welcome everybody. Greetings. My name is Julia Witkiewicz-Devoy, and I'm really pleased to be the chairperson this year for the HDS Alumni Council. I've been a member of council for a number of years now, and I am just so excited for the opportunity to facilitate our AAC this year and to serve with such dedicated fellow alums. I want to welcome everybody and and also compliment how amazing the Braun Room looks this evening. It's awesome. I love the setup. We are still trying to figure out how you get selected to be on the wall, but and also
Julia's volunteering.
Yeah, yeah, put me up there. But also to welcome everyone who is joining us through live streaming tonight. This is new for us, so it's very exciting. We're here tonight to do something that's actually in many ways very sacred to a lot of us, to our HDS students, to our graduates, and to our communities. And that is to share stories, to elevate voices, and to celebrate them, to learn from each other, and to be in dialogue with each other. So a note to the students that are sitting in here tonight with us, the part of your experience where you're learning and in dialogue doesn't end when you graduate from HDS. We're going to keep pulling you back in. And in fact, a lot of our Alumni Council, a lot of what the AAC does is it finds ways to keep alumni part of the community and to keep that part of your original HDS self alive and well. So, as a council, under the leadership of my predecessor, the most awesome Samuel Nixon Jr., MDiv 1991, we launched the Divinity Dialogue series last year. And it was just unbelievable. It was amazing. And I think we were all just so excited about how that dialogue and that communication flowed. So I'm very grateful tonight to be here helping to keep this going. And I'm even more grateful to be with such amazing, exceptional HDS graduates. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about them. And the first thing I'll say is that as a student here at HDS, one of the courses that I was fortunate enough to take was Education for Liberation. And that was with Nancy Richardson. And some folks in the room might remember Nancy Richardson. And that course really changed my life and my way of thinking. And so Nancy was my advisor. She was my mentor. Both as a student here and after I graduated, we kept in touch. And when I had begun to think about what I was going to do after HDS and after the positions that I was working in, Nancy and I communicated about that. And she said, you know, how would you like to live your life? And I said, I would like to live a life that has meaning and action as part of it. But I need to keep following role models that can show me, you know, how to keep doing that and how to do that. And she directed me to a friend of hers, to Brinton Lykes, over at Boston College. And so I went over there, and I've been watching and learning and sort of following Brinton's role model for years now. So I'm even more incredibly excited to welcome and to thank Brinton for being here. Brinton Lykes is MDiv 73 from the Div School. She's a professor of community psychology, community and cultural psychology, and she's also the associate director of the Center for Human Rights and International Justice at Boston College. Her current research focuses on sexual violence against women in context of armed conflict and post-conflict transition, and their struggles for truth and justice, healing and reparation. She also focuses on migration and post-deportation human rights violations and their effects on women and children, with a particular focus on transnational identities and mixed status families. Professor Lykes has published extensively in refereed journals and edited volumes, and she's co-edited 2 books and co-authored 2 others. In 2012, she received the American Psychological Association's Ignacio Martin Barrow Lifetime Peace Practitioner Award, and recently, this past summer, she was awarded with the American Psychological Association's International Humanitarian of the Year Award for 2013. Welcome again. The other guest that we have, and I'm so delighted to get to know Jeff and to know more about his work, is Jeff Seul, MTS 1997 graduate, who serves as the chairman of the Peace Appeal Foundation, an international NGO that helps to catalyze and support broad-scale local stakeholder peace-driven processes to end civil wars and to create a national dialogue to avert them. The Peace Appeal Foundation was founded in 2000 with a mandate from 5 Nobel Peace Laureates, including Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. His recent activities include helping frame legislation to help establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Nepal, contributing to some forthcoming guidelines for crafting amnesty programs at the end of civil wars and other times of political transition, and contributing to efforts to achieve comprehensive ceasefire agreements and peace plans in Myanmar and Burma. Jeff is a partner with Holland & Knight, an international law firm, and he has previously served as the general counsel for the Boston-based software company. He's also a Dharma teacher with Boundless Way Zen, an emerging Western Zen school. So welcome, Brinton and Jeff. We are so delighted to have you here. Thank you. Thank you. Back in mid-September, I emailed all the alumni to introduce myself as this year's council chairperson. And in the message, I shared with our alumni community my thinking on what makes our HDS graduates so unbelievably unique. And I used 3 words to describe that. And that was values, vision, and action. And it, as I said, I kind of circle back to my time here with Nancy Richardson. For me, I wanted to live a life that included action. I didn't just want to talk about things. I wanted to be out there doing them too. And I believe that people come to HDS with this core restlessness. They have an idea, they have questions, they have a calling, and they work here to develop a vision that's rooted in those values that they bring and that they further develop here. And that leads to action out in the world for the good of others. So let me open up this dialogue. Stop talking myself. Let me open up this dialogue by asking about that sense of restlessness. And was that true for both of you? And did you come here with an experience of restlessness? And how did it change over the course of your time here? And so, responses from Brinton and Jeff.
Okay, ladies first in the South. Where I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana in the 1950s, and what my Northern Irish colleagues were later to tell me was a biracial family. That is, my mother was Catholic and my father was of Protestant descent. And by the time I was aware of such things, he was quite an agnostic. I'm the second child in a family of 9, and I grew up in a segregated city. As layers of institutional racism were beginning to be peeled away through the courageous organizing and actions of young black men and women and some rare white elders. Among those rare white elders was Archbishop John Francis Rummel, who had admitted 2 black students to Notre Dame Seminary a year before I was born, and who ordered the removal of white and colored signs from churches as early as 1951, and in 1953 issued his pastoral letter officially desegregating the entire Archdiocese of New Orleans. But that was not without huge resistance among those political leaders. As a white privileged child of parents who could send me to a private Catholic school, I might have missed these historic shifts beneath my feet had my cousins' parents not yanked them out of the private school that we all attended together, and had not Archbishop Rummel decided to excommunicate their grandfather because he organized boycotts against the Catholic Church and refused to desegregate Catholic schools in St. Bernard and Plaquemines Parish, where he was a local political leader. This polarizing issue played itself out on the national scene, costing lives throughout the South, and fractured my family in ways which I really did not understand at the time, and it would take me many years to piece that together. But despite this partial knowledge and understanding, racial injustice, enforcing my privileges as a white woman, and the marginalization and exclusion of blacks were models for direct and indirect resistance and struggle against injustices, and shaped my childhood and my adolescence. Equally important was that experience of white religious leadership. So those years took me to college and to Paris, which just coincidentally was 1968, where I was immersed in the study of medieval philosophy and theology and architecture as students and workers closed the university and then the city. That for me was an introduction to Marxist ideology and to the experiences of Karl Marx, but also the experiences of protesting on the streets. I met the worker priest movement there, the work of Simone Weil, and also took a pilgrimage from Paris to Chartres Cathedral. So despite being an outsider to these multiple ideologies, the political commitments unified us across them, and I became increasingly concerned about the deep inequities in our society, both in France and in the United States. I was in France when Martin Luther King was killed and when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And when I returned to the US, I joined protests of the Vietnam War and volunteered in a Head Start program in rural Appalachia. All of these experiences and the continuing presence of religious people in my life led me, much to the consternation of my parents, to Harvard Divinity School. Because I sought to fuse my intellectual curiosities with the kind of activist involvement that I had seen around me since I was a very young child. Despite the fact that I had met T. Grace Atkinson when I was in college, most of you may not know who she is, but she was a lesbian separatist feminist who grew up in Louisiana. I had been appalled by her lesbian feminism and wanted to pursue the earlier Marxist ideology with which I was familiar. But it was here at Harvard Divinity School that I encountered marginalization and oppression and exclusion as a woman, and it was among women who entered the Divinity School in those years that I began to discover that despite the privileges that I had and the ways in which my economic and racial selves had privileged me, that I was being marginalized in a church and in a divinity school that I had sought to continue a struggle of learning more. I also encountered liberation theology, Don Helder Camara, Dorothy Day, Raimundo Panicar, and that nurtured a restlessness and put me into communication again with the international community. So for 40 years, it's a little shocking to the system to realize how long it's been. That restlessness has shifted in that I am no longer the young, sort of outspoken and radical self that I was in my 20s. I don't know whether that's good or that's bad. I've become, as Julia said, a university professor, and I seek to use the leverage that I have and the power that I have in those positions to continue in the paths that I had during my days at the Divinity School. I teach at an elite Catholic university here in the Boston area, but I've also worked in communities of war and in zones of armed conflict and in communities emerging from war. So we have many interests in common we've discovered through getting to know each other through this process. For me, one of the most significant political and social changes during these 40 years has been the diminishment, or some would say the disappearances, of the cross-community social movements in which I lived my youth and young to mid-adulthood. The journey during those years was deeply collective and deeply communitarian, and it often feels much more solitary today. Over these latter years, I have accompanied those who have deeply suffered, and I have been privileged to facilitate multiple processes through which they claim their power, name their strengths, and embrace languages and rituals that have often been repressed through colonial occupations They take resources through which they have survived across generations of violence, and they move beyond survival to actions. Many have been silenced, tortured, displaced, and more, and yet practice what I have called in a recent article to be published later this year, people's psychosocial praxis. So for me, the challenge is continually to listen deeply and then to announce the arrival of new voices and to cede my power to their presence. These years have taught me there are no quick fixes, that real change is slow and extends over multiple lifetimes. And most days I'm okay with that, not every day. But I believe that our children's children will reap the fruits of the seeds that we sow today, and assuming that we don't destroy the earth and each other over these years, I look forward to their being able to nurture themselves into a world that is less unjust and more equitable. And I wish for all of you to be able to pursue your restlessness for another 40 years.
Yay. Thank you. Jeff?
I was definitely restless as I came here to HDS in '95, and that restlessness was I think, the driving impulse of coming here. And I often think of coming here as one of the smartest things I've ever done, for reasons that, for much different reasons than I thought I was coming here for. I was already a young lawyer when I came here, and doing corporate work, finding that to be a very rough and tumble world. I was also, during this phase of my life, I was also raised Catholic. I'd gone to a Jesuit college. I discovered the sort of contemplative strain within Christianity, and I'd also discovered certain intersections between that and Zen Buddhism. I was also studying Kyudo, Zen archery at the time. And so my struggle as I conceived it at that moment, the restlessness I was feeling, was a lot about just how do I integrate this sort of, whatever drew me to this rough and tumble, corporate law world as I was then experiencing it, and this other dimension. And it felt like this kind of apples and oranges situation. And I had an apple with which I felt I was sort of had become discontented, and I came here to find an orange. And I thought that orange was going to be becoming a scholar in the area of sort of contemplative spiritual practices viewed comparatively. And I had a real crisis my first semester here. It was probably just a couple months into my first semester, when I discovered really that while I wanted to be a sort of thoughtful, reflective practitioner of meditation, a practice I'd begun then, I really did not want to be a scholar in this area. And so, what was I doing here? I mean, I had given up, a sort of budding law practice. I turned down an offer of partnership in a good firm, and here I was. And about this time, the New York Times broke a story about the massacre in Srebrenica towards the end of the war in the former Yugoslavia. And about 8,000 Bosnian Muslims were massacred by Serbs who had overrun a supposed UN safe area. And in this article, there was a picture of a Muslim woman who had hanged herself to avoid being killed. And this picture moved me to tears. And I realized, that religion was was intertwined with this conflict in so many conflicts in ways I hadn't thought about deeply before. I had in law school taken courses in mediation and alternatives to litigation. I'd begun to work a bit as a mediator before I came here, and it instantly occurred to me that what I needed to be doing here was exploring this intersection of religion and conflict, and its contributions to conflict, its potential for to be a constructive force in conflict situations. And Harvard turned out to be the perfect place to do that. I hadn't the foggiest idea that it could be, but the university has incredible resources in this area. Little disjointed. I had to, I and a few other people who shared this interest had to, kind of tease it out and make connections that weren't sort of prepackaged for us, but it was really fertile ground for this. And so rather than go on for a PhD in the area that I thought I would try to get a PhD in, I ended up focusing my MTS studies on this, and as I was finishing my MTS, I got invited to teach in this area at Harvard Law School, where I taught and did research in this area and did further graduate work and started to get deeply involved in international conflict resolution work. And this is going on almost 20 years ago. 3 years later or so, after leaving the Divinity School, I had another apples and oranges moment where, out of the blue, I got invited to join, at a very early stage, an interesting tech company. So suddenly this world I'd been in, as its general counsel, so this world I'd been in before started tugging at me again, and I had this other crisis moment, again, apples and oranges. It was starting to occur to me then that it might be possible to make a fruit salad. But I figured I'd have to kind of do it in serial. I'd, get the apple, get the orange, and then somehow they'd all kind of end up together. And I felt like I was leaving this world of conflict resolution that I cared about so deeply for a while, thinking privately, that I'm going to return to this someday. And I joined before the company came out of stealth mode, before there was anybody knew what we were doing, and what we were doing was creating a very secure online collaboration environment, one of the first of its kind. And shortly after we launched, this South African named Hannes Siebert, who'd been very involved in the peace process in his home country, walked into our office and said, hey, I'm wondering if you can help me. I have a few feature requests. You're not going to understand my world, but I'm dealing with this really difficult collaboration problem. I've just been invited to be the new neutral facilitator in the peace process in Sri Lanka, which was at an impasse before I received this invitation, and the parties still won't meet together face to face, but I've got them talking again using your software. And I almost fell out of my chair and said, well, I do understand something about your world, and yeah, we can help. And Hannes had just a few months earlier gotten together with these 5 Nobel Peace Laureates to start the Peace Appeal Foundation, and that sort of began my involvement with that organization about 13 years ago. So the restlessness was part of what brought me here. And I think, kind of honoring that restlessness and sticking with it and not turning from the restless moments that followed is a lot of, what's helped me find my fruit salad.
Love it. Thank you. So a little bit more about, are there pieces of your HDS experience that help you today? Pieces that you can think about that have come all the way back to your HDS days that you call upon occasionally in your daily life?
Sure. I think that in some ways the experiences of being here were opportunities to think deeply about some of the issues that we've both been talking about, and to be in conversation with other people who were thinking deeply about those issues and who wanted to take action. So I learned here a lot about working collaboratively and collectively and then acting. That is not just reflecting, but also taking action. And I also learned how to, in a very comforting and comforted at some level environment, how to speak truth to power. There weren't always administrators who were interested in opening the doors of the university to women. And there was a lot of stereotyping about why women were studying theology and what were women doing in MDiv programs, and particularly Catholic women. Good questions, I might add. But so I learned a lot about that, and I think a lot about it. But maybe most importantly, I made relationships and friendships, both locally, nationally, and internationally, that continue to be the relationships that are critically important to me. I hang out a lot with divines, even though I'm teaching in psychology. As you mentioned in the introduction, I learned an enormous amount from Nancy Richardson in terms of undoing racism. I worked with her in an organization called Grailville. We set up an alternative women's theological education program. So I learned about how to earn a living in the institution and how to work to subvert the institution by starting other organizations. So I learned that change requires both being in systems and also being outside of systems. And I mean, and it sounds like we both have been blessed, gifted with the capacity to think that you can have a foot in both places. That sometimes you feel quite stretched in directions and that there are not enough hours in the day, or that you don't have a personal life, or some of those, your personal loved ones haven't laid eyes on you for weeks, or whatever it might be. But so I also learned something from Raimundo Panikkar. I often use statements that I think I learned here. I don't really know if he ever said this, but I remember him as having said in a lecture here that in order to really listen deeply, you have to stand under an experience in order to begin to understand it. And that has been an enormously important guiding principle for me, because I think it is, I have worked in many zones of armed conflict and with many people whose lives are deeply disenfranchised. And I think it's super hard to understand any of that from the privilege of white higher education in the United States. And so I often think about what does it mean to stand under an experience. I learned a lot from Henry Nouwen, not just from his book, but also about what it means to be a wounded healer, about what it means to work in these kinds of zones and how you are marked in your own body by these experiences. And so you better learn how to take care of yourself. You better find some place, some people who can accompany you, or you will not be able to sustain the struggle. And I think I learned a lot of that here from William Rogers, who taught between the Ed School, and from the men and women with whom I lived at the time, with whom we were trying to create some kind of alternative community, one of whom is here right now. So it's really all of those were things I learned here, or the communities of people I had an opportunity to come into contact with through the Divinity School and through the Divinity School's part within the larger university. That is, I did a lot of work with people in the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We set up the Women's Counseling and Resource Center, the first ever of its kind in the United States. It now seems like it's hard to believe that that hasn't. So yes, lots.
Thank you. Jeff?
Beyond the wonderful mentors I found here and in other parts of the Harvard community, and the thinking and growing the coursework and whatnot itself helped me do, I think there are a couple things that are really distinctive about this place, Harvard Divinity School, that really help me and that I sort of draw on perhaps even more than I know on a daily basis. And one is that I'm very, very interested in sort of the tensions and the potential for goodness that comes in environments that might feel very charged because we find deeply held values colliding and or close corollary identities colliding, and this is a place that draws, people from many, many different sort of, perspectives, walks of life, in a much richer way than I had ever experienced in any sort of environment that I'd been in before. And there's a way in which just being here, helped me develop a capacity to sort of see that, appreciate that, navigate that, listen. I was taking negotiation courses and conflict resolution courses in which we talked about the importance of, listening and all the, social psychological research about, how to do it well. And yet, this was a really interesting environment in which to be doing that sort of learning and listening with people who are coming from very different places, very different experiences all over the world, many different religious traditions, many different sort of perspectives. I think it helped that, or to make it even richer, the fact that you'd have students from the BTI coming here. We had the opportunity to go out there sometimes, from different, let's say more some more conservative religious trajectories or strains than you might find predominating in this environment. Not to overgeneralize, but so that's one thing. Another thing was just, and you touched on this sense of coming with that restlessness and not and being a bit of a mess that first semester and really not knowing where all this was going to lead. This was a place that just kind of communicated, trust it, run with it, more than I think most academic environments, academic communities do. And I really appreciated that, and I think it's something of a touchstone for me, in situations where even now I wonder, this direction or that direction, pear or banana, or or richer fruit salad. So that a very sort of a great holding environment for for figuring out what one's original contributions and direction can be.
Thank you. So regarding that email that I sent to our alumni base earlier that I mentioned, I received some amazing responses to that opening email. One alumnus wrote about his career in renewable energy, inspired by his time here at HDS, and his belief that he can make a difference in the world by working in that field. Another, who's a rural parish priest in Italy, responded about his own organic farming practices as an everyday process of making a difference. Several people wrote about international service and missionary work. And I was amused and pleased that one alum replied that responding to my ideas or my request for feedback on values, vision, and action was much more enjoyable for him that afternoon than working at his job. But another person wrote about the idea of leading a life of action as opposed to a life where you do service as a break from your everyday life. And that's a really powerful thought, and I know it's something that the three of us have talked about before as well, and it's really captured in your stories. But I wanted to ask you both to maybe elaborate a little bit more about leading a life of action and as an activist. Brinton?
Well, maybe in order to try and push this towards a dialogue rather than sequential monologues, when I listen to you talk about conflict resolution or working with people who at some level know they have to live in the same space and the same geography together, but have what feel like intractable conflicts and or are emerging from enormous fractured war experiences and are themselves wounded and suffering from those experiences. It feels to me like action includes being able to sit with people and to listen, being able to bring the relational self into some sort of dialogic engagement, being able to think about things in the way the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in New Orleans talk about thinking outside of the box. Yeah. I feel like an enormous amount of institutional life. I talk about a lot of my work as an administrator as engaging me in administrivia. It's necessary administrivia. Yeah. There's a lot of it that has to be done. But in fact, it's very easy to just think inside the box, to say no to people when they want to do something new, to not take the time to, and if one has had the privilege of sitting in context with people who have are emerging from an armed conflict or living on the margins, you really see how people have to think outside the box. Yeah. And so for me, action is not always, it's movement interpersonally, it's movement intellectually, it's movement socio-emotionally, and then it's being able to contest the edges of the box and say, this is not always a box. The People's Institute did this little diagram of putting 9 dots on a page, and they ask you to connect those 9 dots without picking up your pen. Right. And you cannot believe how hard it is. I learned it once again this weekend when I did a workshop with my students. I've been to 10 of these, and I still have a hard time. I've done the exercise, and they tell me the trainers can't do it because we spend so much of our time looking at dots thinking they're boxes, when in fact nobody says make a box out of this. They just say connect the dots. So I think that for me, action is about being able to keep myself pushing the edges of the box and facilitate processes that tap into people's resources to move out of the box. And conflict resolution seems like a place where that really is a piece of what it's about.
Yeah, and part of what I think I hear you saying is there's a way in which, in conflict situations, people are really stuck in their box, their construction of a particular situation. And it's unhelpful to bring your own box to that, kind of context. And there's a way in which this, we talk a lot in our work. There are all sorts of fancy, words that we use and you hear in the scholarship and whatnot, complex, adaptive, emergent systems, and blah blah blah. Right. But on some level, I think what this it means is, these are very complex, messy situations, and the action is a lot about trying to alter dynamics in some way that something new emerges. And it's like, we often think of action as action with an agenda, action with a goal in mind, action, driving for this objective or that objective. But I hear you saying, and it's my experience too, that a lot of this work is about sort of, there's almost a passive dimension to this work, or a stance of, I'm not quite sure what our agenda is here. That there's a quality of that to the action in this kind of work, I find.
Right.
Thank you. We have a lot of students and alums here tonight, and some of them are in the process of thinking about their own paths and where that will take them after graduation. What advice do you have for current students and alums that are thinking about and dealing with their own sense of restlessness? What thoughts would you have for them?
I think I feel like one of the most important things is that you follow your passion. I think there's so much drawing us in so many different directions. This making your own fruit salad, for me, is an example of following your passion. I begin with the assumption that everybody's here at Harvard Divinity School because they have some kind of restlessness, and they come here with that in mind. and that we all share a desire for something more, or a belief that all are part of a larger humankind, can be called into some sort of transformative struggles towards a more just and equitable world. So we need to engage each day, and we need to have the energy to stick with it. And it seems to me if you do something that you have a passion about, and you're able to walk alongside of other people and be connected, listen, be still, that we can together engage in what I like to think of as compassionate solidarity for and with each other. And that requires a deep curiosity, a constant willingness and interest in wanting to know more, and also having a passion about something.
I think this place produces interesting, stories. I was talking with Susan Lawler about I'm not letting a cat out of the bag here, but the, various short videos of alumni's, post-graduation stories that they've assembled, and I've kind of looked at that list, and I'm just awed by the incredible range and, depth of things that alums are doing. So I expect, there's a way in which people self-select into an environment like this, and are probably good at, trusting their restlessness coming here and beyond. But, that would be my advice is, that restlessness, I think, demands our considered attention. We can't follow every road in life, but it's also dangerous to think too much in terms of binaries. And I think the struggles that one might feel to try to join two topic areas or three, or 2 or 3 courses of action and whatever, that intersection is the place where one can discover what one's original contribution may be. And so leaning into that struggle, that uneasiness, I think is a really generative thing. Many people find even though it can feel very disorienting.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to now turn to the audience and ask you and invite questions from the audience to Brinton and Jess.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Ariane Johnson. I just want to first thank you, Julia, for tailoring this particular discussion perfectly for my own personal life intersection. It's just really convenient to be here. I am one of the students. I am an MDiv, and I am studying Islam in my MDiv degree. And I entered this school with a lot of this angst and lots of excitement about figuring out how to go about doing interfaith dialogue. And in the process of my 3 years here, I'm a third-year student writing my thesis currently. I have shifted a little bit, and I had a summer internship at the United Nations this past summer, and now I'm feeling really drawn into this conflict reconciliation thing. And so my own project right now is to try to think about how identity plays into reconciling situations of conflict with religion as a forefront sort of discussion, which I wasn't really seeing in the political sphere when I was working in the UN as much. So I have 3 questions for you. Are you ready? First of all, it has to do with what you were just talking about forging your own sense of career in the fruit basket. And as we are those of us here who are going into pursuing new careers, how much in your perspective right now as established career-holding people, do you think my generation should be focusing on kind of finding positions that will fit our interests, or forging our new ones, new paths, finding communities that might need our voices, and seeing how we might go about constructing our own sort of initiatives, and what's the practical reality of that. The second question is, as I'm taking all my classes, I'm wondering, in your worlds, how much is your energy dedicated to deconstructing, and how much of it do you feel is about construction work? It's one of the questions that comes up a lot in our student stuff. And then just the third question, how is it that we might be able to contact you personally if we would want to, throw out a couple thesis proposals your way or something like that? Is that possible?
Go for it.
Well, to answer the third question first, I'm sure we'd each be happy to be contacted.
We can't hide from you, can we? Age of new technologies.
Too late for that. So your first question about practical realities, I think. We struggle with this, actually, within my organization, which is, trying to carve its own path in a field that's just emerging, which never has enough resources for, to meet the demand there is for requests for assistance. And one of the ways we specifically struggle with it is through our processes, that we've been involved in throughout the world. There is a younger generation of practitioners developing, people who've, in local stakeholders who got involved in, the processes we help support in those regions. A couple other, young people, not local stakeholders, but who, went through a graduate program and got attached to us somehow, and desperately want a career path in this field. And it's not really a field that offers, clear-cut career paths just yet. And it may never. Who knows? We're trying to solve that. We're trying to, raise money to make that possible. But my take on the practical reality thing is, and I very much experienced this myself, this, kind of twisted career path and fruit salad thing had a practicality logic to it as well. I have a family and, and so forth. But I'd say, I would just personally encourage you, tilt in the direction of forge. We need people to forge. It's, the people who are really feel driven, and it's not even drive, it's just can't help it, right? Just have to do this. Find a way to forge. And so as yet, I think there, in the field we're talking about, it's not, in the law practice side of my life, there's a set system for people coming out. It's kind of a factory, right? You go to law school, you're a summer associate 2 years in a row, you get an offer from the firm. Hopefully it works that way, But there's a very set path, less so in this domain. So, ultimately, I think each individual has to come up with the answer to that. There are places like units within the UN and whatnot that you probably know about now, where there are a few career slots, but they're few and far between in this field at this point.
Just to add to that a little bit about your question about deconstructing and constructing, I think if you end up choosing to earn a living in a mainstream institution, as I have, that is, I get a salary from a university, I spend an enormous amount of time in the deconstructing side of things, and deconstructing the things that I was taught and did teach and need to rethink, because I've spent a lot of time on the ground. not constructing, but accompanying local people who are doing the constructing, bringing some of the resources it seemed to offer, scaffolding, for example, of ways of thinking critically about issues that might not be as available to local Mayan communities in rural Guatemala, or that kind of thing. So they're constructing, and I'm accompanying that process and trying to figure out what I know that might add to that, give something along the way. So I think that the decisions about whether to join an organization that's doing something and try and work with one's restlessness from that base also carries with it, and I've had to discover this along the way, that you owe it to the institution in which you're located to push your restlessness onto them too, because if you don't try and push the edges of them, then what you're doing stops when you stop doing it, as opposed to actually influences. I mean, my sense of life is that I have learned an enormous amount about people whose voices don't travel up as much as people are willing to listen to my voice. And so I need to open spaces where those people can speak their truths. And so the way in which we understand psychology, for example, shifts based upon the majority world, the global south. So that deconstructing and constructing, I think, is complementary, can be conflictual. But I also want to say that one of the things that I do think is very characteristic of your generation and the one that follows you is that kids learn how to start organizations now in the 7th and 8th grade. They get to high school and they've already, they didn't just do the lemon stand, they turned it into something on the web. And so there is this sense of, always having to start the new next thing. And I sometimes want to encourage people to look around. Yeah. Find this organization, figure out what they're doing, and see if what you're interested in can complement, add value to, or sometimes there are things that, bring your vision into some of the things that are there and help those of us. I mean, one of the things that's really, deeply problematic sometimes is I go to places and do things and there's loads of people there, but they're all my age. And that's just not a good thing, So we need this, we need this intergenerational, this is a great intergenerational space right here. We need more of these.
Great. One more question?
Thank you again. My name is Chris Hansen. I'm MDiv 2010. And it sort of goes with the constructing, deconstructing question. But earlier you mentioned that you must work within systems and outside of systems, and it's something that I've always strongly believed in. But that's also a very lonely space because you're constantly being judged by those in the other space that you're moving in and between. You're very much betwixt and between, to borrow from MDiv time. But how do you cope with that? Because I very much, in the social work social justice work I do, it can also be a very alienating or lonely experience because you are constantly darting in between sort of this established network and then also outside of that network as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that. I can identify with that. I think part of how one possible language for it is finding allies, finding other people who are darting between those spaces and not expecting to find accompaniment in either space. I think that's what is very challenging. I've had some experiences where all I could do is go into the room and close the door and cry because they have been so painful of what you would, of people of being in places where you think that you're working alongside and with people, and because of who you are, let's say in El Salvador at the time that the U.S. has just bombed the villages there, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your solidarity is, you are from the United States and your government just killed hundreds of people. And so people are going to treat you like they never met you before, like you're a really oppositional figure. And So having spaces and places where other people are doing similar things and believing that there are other people to do similar things, because one of the things I've learned about white privilege, and I keep having to learn this, is that we think especially if we think of ourselves as progressive, we think we've got it together, and none of the other white people in the room have it together, right? And that means we don't look for allies. We rather somehow, even though we don't mean to be saying I'm better than you, but we communicate that. Or we communicate, you have to, you can't get married, you can't have kids, you can't, because you have to, do whatever, the movement. And that's just not good vibes to be giving off. So I can, I tell you, I've been there, felt that, and it is, but it's not a lifetime of loneliness. I mean, there are lots of people out here. It's a question of, finding them, and then you have to nurture that connection. And that, takes time, but it's also fun. And the other thing is, I really do think you have to figure out how to have fun in this kind of work, because if you can't have fun with people, and, I grew up not really laughing much at myself. I have really learned how to laugh at myself over the last 30 years. And it's a really good experience, and it's good to laugh, because it, it sort of gives you more energy. Do you want to add to that, Mel?
I'm not sure how to answer it, because I just see it so unavoidably in the nature of this work, and I see it as the work, you know what I mean? It's like that's this work is ultimately about, I don't know what word to use, but it's forging relations, developing, helping people, think out of the box, whatever, exactly at those, those seams or those seeming points of disjunction or discontinuity. And so it just seems like, you're describing for yourself, you're just in harm's way of that. And I think that is maybe a lonely space, but also a very social space in some way, a space where one is sort of privileged to participate in, even help initiate conversations and point out things that, or invite people to see things that might appear rather obvious from that space, in between or bouncing back and forth, how you put it, or whatever, that might not seem as obvious to people who do that less. And so it's a real space of opportunity too, I think, and that's a great compensation for whatever kind of discomfort one might feel in that space, in my experience too. So.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for this component of the evening's program. I do want to thank you both so much for making the time to spend with us this evening. It is so generous of both of you. And on behalf of the school and the Alumni Council, I'm very, very pleased to give you these tokens of our appreciation. These little HDS plaques.
Thank you.
Nice. Oh, thank you.
So I'm going to invite the Vice Chair for the Alumni Council up to give a closing final moment of reflection. And then following that, I'd like to invite everyone out into Andover Hall for a continuation of our celebration and for some refreshment and conversation in more of a casual way. So thank you. Sarah?
Good evening. I'm Sarah Taylor Peck, the Vice Chair of the Alumni Council. Thank you both so much for your reflections tonight. We planned this event as a beginning for the alumni and the current students and the community members at Harvard Divinity School. And so as you can see, we've picked this theme for the year that starts with values, and we picked two speakers who shared great values of peace and restoration, of bringing people together, of giving voice to important issues that we all care about. And then we ask them to share their stories about putting those values into a vision, casting a vision for their life, and sharing a little bit about what we might call their ministry in organizations like the Center for Human Rights and International Justice and the Peace Appeal Foundation. So I hope that for all of you, as we heard their values, casting of their vision and how they put their vision into action, that this is a stirring and an invitation and a beginning for all of us to do the same, for all of us to think about where is the call, where are the questions, where is that whisper nudging us to be also agents of change and agents of vision and action. So we anticipate good dialogue on this subject in our reception. All are invited, and we hope that you will meet us there. Thank you.